Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to dive into how to start designing and implementing the logistics for our non-player characters, the enemy. So basically, we'll cover how to enable the NPCs to do scouting, to be able to understand or give them some sort of a way to explore their surrounding. And while they're exploring, if they happen to um, find particular points of interests, let's call them resources, then pretty much they need to kind of take a note of that and they need to start collecting those resources. In the meantime, they also need to be aware of the player character, which is their enemy. So the NPCs need to be aware of the player character and they should be able to um, determine when to engage with the player character if the player character is coming close enough to them. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the actual implementation of this. And let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, guys, so let's jump into the Unity editor and let's first take a look at the actual level design. So over here, what I have done is placed a bunch of resources around this area in the level. This is going to be the base camp for the enemy, the NPCs. I have the storage facility for the NPC. And then, of course, we have the actual NPC representing the enemies themselves. So we have two of them over here, and we have two of them on this side of the level. So the purpose of this demonstration is to continue on our journey as far as implementing game mechanics. And over here, we are going to illustrate how the NPCs would be able to explore their environment. And when they're exploring their environment, they would be able to detect uh, points of interest and perform specific actions. So let's go ahead and play this. Let's wait until Unity runs. And I'm gonna have I'm gonna utilize the design time because there's a bunch of things that I would like to discuss here. So over here, notice as the NPCs are exploring or scouting their environment and they're detecting the specific points of interest. Again, in this case, the resources, a signal is sent to their own storage facility, and the storage facility initiates a collector. Um, Another thing I want to bring to your attention is that in this particular demo, we are performing multiple instances of resource collection and how they should behave when they are coming back to the storage facility and whose turn is it going to be, right? Who's going to go first? So we'll cover about that as well, the preliminary implementation of that. So let's go ahead and move our player closer to the base camp for the enemy. And this next mechanic I want to illustrate happens to be when the player character gets too close to the enemy, to the NPC. And basically, notice right now, the NPCs are just scouting. We are not in their line of sight yet, as soon as we get close enough, they change their state. So now, there we go. You just shot me once, twice. They get into the attack mode, and basically they're gonna get into they're gonna stay in the attack mode until the enemy dies. Either they die or the enemy dies. So right now I'm gonna go ahead and try to escape it because I want to show you that once we are at a distance greater than the threshold that's being incorporated into the logic right now, they would go back to their initial scouting state and they will return to their original um, location. So seems like this one is pretty consistent. Let's see if we can get away from it. There are some locations that the NPCs cannot get to. There we go. So notice that the state changed and it's going back to its environment. Okay, so now let's take a pause over here, stop it, and dive into the actual code. Okay, guys, so here we see the NPC's PFAT. And first, I want to go over the structure. So it's nothing complicated. Again, we have the basic capsule that's representing the body. And then we have the head component, which is basically composed of the eyes, the nose, and the cylinder over here is the headband. And then we have added a couple of other regions here that the player character currently doesn't have. We'll start incorporating this in the player character in the next video. But basically, we want to give it some sort of a senses, right? And one of the senses is going to be sight. And the sight for now, we are going to utilize another collider. And this basically will be the sense, basically the when a player becomes too close to the NPC, then we would be aware of that, and then we would utilize the enemy sense controller script to perform some actions. Over here, we also have attached a new geometry. Again, nothing major, just a basic cylinder that's going to represent the cannon. And then we have a spawn point associated to the cannon. And this is where the bullets are going to spawn and start shooting, right? So this is the body of the cannon. There is a root for it. And you always want to have a root because the scale factors are very important, right? Your child's scales might be different. For example, the cannon right now is not a uniform scale. So if your relationship between the parent and child are not properly done, that you could run into some trouble. So make sure you pay attention to that small little detail over there. And then lastly, we have this spawn point for the bullet whenever we are going to start attacking. Now let's go over and take a look at the actual components, the scripts that make this happen. So we do have a rigid body attached to it. We do have an enemy controller, which we'll get into. We do have a nav mesh agent, which is going to be utilized for the movement of the NPC character. And then we have the enemy attack controller. And then we have another animator state machine, which basically is going to be handling when the cannon is supposed to be facing and starting facing towards the player and start the attack process, the shooting process. So let's go ahead and bring up the enemy controller and let's see how this is put together. All right, so this is the code that's handling the enemy's primary logic. And we have a couple of things to go over here. So this code is becoming a little more involved now as you start building your game and your logic becomes more complicated. Obviously, your code is going to become more complicated as well. So we have an ID to identify the enemy. And then we have three parameters. These three parameters over here are basically going to be utilized to randomly select points within the agent's location. And those are going to be the initial scouting points that the agent is going to go to once they come to life, right? So we have a radius defined. We have a minimum distance and a maximum distance, right? So the radius around the NPC for random scouting points, the minimum distance for the NPC to a scouting point, and the maximum attempts to find the valid point on the mesh, right? So we are going to also try to see how many hits we want to do on the nav mesh before we select a particular point. We have a reference to the agent. That's the nav mesh agent. Uh, we have a Boolean variable, whether that indicates whether we are scouting or not. We have an index, and then we have a collection of vector trees, which are going to represent those scouting points. Then obviously we have the how many scouting points we want to generate, like how many points we want to generate to start doing the scouting around the scene. We have a reference to the player object once the player object comes into sight. And then we have another variable which will determine if that player is in sight or not. Okay, and then we have also a reference to the enemy attack controller, which is responsible of basically shooting once the enemy is in sight. So in the start function, we did, if you are scouting, which by default the agent is in scouting mode, right? You got to start from somewhere. So by default, the agent is actually in scouting mode. We go through this iteration based on the scouting points that we want to generate. And then what we are doing is that we are randomizing those positions, which is handled by this scout random position, where we are calling the random nav mesh point, and then we are passing the position of the agent and the scouting radius, right? The area we want to utilize to attempt to hit and determine if that's going to be a particular valid transform or vector tree position that the agent can travel to. And then basically this is the function that handles all of that, right? So it's going to determine the center of the circle, which is that radius. And then it's going to have a for loop with a number of attempts that are predefined. And then it's going to randomize the sphere direction based on the radius. And what we are going to do is determine a particular random location within that radius, and if we have a hit or not. If we do have a hit, and the hit happens to be greater than the minimum distance, right? Because we don't want it, that's another configuration, right? What's the minimum distance you want the new scouting position to be? If that happens to be greater than the minimum distance of that is desired, then we have a hit point that we can return back into the collection, and that's what's happening here. Otherwise, we return 0, and this keeps on happening until we have all of our scouting points. So that's number 1. So that's basically what happens when the NPC starts. It generates its predefined scouting points based on the configuration. It randomizes those and then initiates its scouting operations, which is covered in the update function. So if you are scouting, basically we determine our distance, between our position and the next scouting position. And if that distance happens to be less than a particular threshold, in this case 1.5 units, then we are going to go ahead and select the next scouting point. Otherwise, we are going to set the destination of the agent to go to this particular scouting point that we are currently on. One other function that is really valuable over here that I want to bring to your attention is the validation of the path. So just because we have a hit on the nav mesh doesn't mean that the agent can get to it, right? Because, and I'll show you what I mean by this, but let me explain you the code and then we can go to the designer and we'll see what that means. So we do want to validate the path of the agent and make sure that the agent can actually get to the destination that is assigned to. So if this destination that was assigned to the agent, We want to make sure that the agent actually can get to it. And that's going to be handled by this valid path function. And basically in this valid path function, you're going to check the status of the path that's currently generated for the agent. And we want to determine if the path can be completed, right? So meaning that the agent can get there 100% guaranteed. Is it partially available to it, right? If the agent may or may not be able to get there. It depends on how things go at runtime. And then the last one, a totally invalid, right? So the given destination for the agent is unreachable. In these two particular cases, what we want to do is go to the next uh, scouting point, right? So we want to go to the next scouting point, and that's basically what's happening here. So we are calling go to the next scouting point. If we cannot get to the current set destination, whether partially or totally incapable of doing it, we want to get the next scouting point, and we want to set that as the new destination. And that's basically what's happening over here. And that will happen for each one of these scouting points. And for each one, the validate path is going to check and determine if that's possible or not. So the next thing that we want to check is to see if the player is inside. If the player is inside, you're going to stop scouting, right? So we are going to change our behavior. We are not scouting anymore. You're going to determine our distance in relation to the player once we sighted it. And if that distance happens to be less than 20 units, then the new destination of the agent is going to become the destination of the player, meaning that we want the agent to go towards the player. That's what's happening over here. Otherwise, let's say for if the player gets out of sight, meaning that you're out of range, then we set the player inside to false, and we go back to scouting. And then what we are doing over here, if we are at the player side, we want to use the attack controller to basically attack the player. And that's handled in the enemy attack controller script. Let's go ahead and take a look at that one now. So let's jump over there. Over here, we have a reference to the animator, the state machine. We have kind of like a number of bullets that eventually we are going to be utilizing in later videos, as far as there's going to be a limit of how many bullets you have and how many bullets you basically once you um, get rid of all of your bullets, what's going to happen? The agent needs to go back and be able to collect more bullets from where? Well, from the storage facility that we have. And that's why we have the storage facility and the resources, right? So for now, it's just a placeholder, a number of bullets. We are going to have a reference to the bullet prefab, and then we have a reference to the spawn point of the bullet. And then we have a couple of flags over here to determine whether we are attacking or we are ready to shoot. And also we have a parameter here for the force that we want to pass to the rigid body, right? Whenever we are going to instantiate the bullet, after we instantiate the bullet, we are going to apply a force on the rigid body to enable the trajectory. So by default, when we start, we get into we send the Boolean variable is attacking to the state machine as an attack parameter. By default is false. So the state machine is going to be in the idle state. And this over here, the attack function, which is called from the enemy controller, is where we determine if we are supposed to attack the enemy or not. If we are supposed to attack the enemy, then we are going to change the state of the state machine, set it to true, and we are going to check to see if we are ready to shoot. If we are ready to shoot, then what we are going to do is that we are going to start a coroutine to spawn the bullet, and we are going to um, basically wait 2 seconds in this particular case before we start uh, spawning the bullet and shooting, right? So technically we have a load time, right? So this is the load time. The load time is going to be 2 seconds. Every 2 seconds, the enemy gets to load their weapon and start instantiating and shooting the bullet. And that's happening over here. So we are instantiating the bullet prefab at the specific spawn point. You want to make sure that we unparent it from the spawn point so it doesn't um, get affected by the enemy's NPC's transform. And then over here, we are accessing the rigid body of the bullet, and we are adding a force uh, in the forward direction based on the acceleration force. And then the force mode is going to be an acceleration. Okay. And then over here, what we are saying is that after 5 seconds, if the bullet is still active in the scene and it hasn't collided with anything, go ahead and destroy it so we don't waste uh, memory. And then we set our ready to shoot back to true, right? So we have ready to shoot false while it's loading. Once it's instantiated and shoots the first bullet, then we are ready to shoot again. And basically we are back to this coroutine, and this will loop until we get the signal from the enemy controller that the player is no longer in sight. All right, cool. So now let's go back to the designer and take a look at the actual uh, mesh. So that's going to be on the level. So here we have a white terrain. Uh, this is the full scope of the actual level. However, this other um, parcels that you see over here, those are not going to be used. They're just there to, as far as the camera is concerned, it kind of blocks off the camera. But our interest is the following. So all of the blue regions that you see is where the uh, nav mesh agent can travel to. So if you recall, when we are randomly generating the scouting points, if those scouting points happen to land on a nav mesh, for example, in this particular region over here, there is no way the agents, any one of these agents, there's no way for them to travel from this area to this area because there's no connectivity, there's no connection over here. So in this kind of scenarios, um, if you don't have that check that we talked about, if you don't have that check that we talked about, the agent is going to stay idle. It wouldn't know what to do. It's going to try to get to a destination that is never going to happen. So it's just going to stay, you know, in a unknown state. You know, it doesn't know what to do, how to get there. So therefore, this is that's the main reason that we want to make sure that the destination that we assign to the agent, uh, even if it's a valid point on the nav mesh, is actually reachable. If it's not reachable, we want to go back to a different nav mesh point. And to illustrate this in real time, let's go ahead and select one of the agents over here. And let's click play. So notice that first point that it wanted to go to, it was out of its reach destination. So it was a valid point on the nav mesh, but it was not reachable. Therefore, what it did is that it immediately changed uh, to the next point. So here we have really cool visual gizmos that basically showcase the direction and the position where the agent is heading, right? So here we have the direction of the vector of how the agent is traveling, where it's going to go to. And once it gets there, we get the next one based on this randomly generated positions right here. And this first one happens to be not reachable, right? So immediately it went to the second one. Very cool, very cool. All right, so this is pretty much what we have for now. I will create another video, upcoming video. We'll still be talking about the NPCs and the agent. In the next video, we'll dive into uh, the logic that handles the resource gathering for the NPCs. That's another interesting topic. So let me go ahead and stop my screen. Cool. So hopefully this was enjoyable. There's quite a bit that's going on over here. In the next video, we'll continue and discuss about the resource gathering elements of the NPC character. All right, talk to you guys soon. Have fun. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.